Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. We've given ourselves 45 minutes, and our purpose is to explain a little bit to you about the revision of the equivalence mechanism. As you know, we've got the revised code, the Sustainable Coffee Reference Code, which is now issued. I hope you've had a look at it. And we are in the process of starting the revision of the equivalence mechanism. We have gone from equivalence mechanism 1.1 to 1.2, and we're on the point of starting the revision of 2.0. And it gives you a chance to learn a bit about it and to ask any questions and perhaps have some feedback and a two-way discussion about it. Hopefully we'll have enough time to do all of that. So the next slide, please. Our next slide is the antitrust statement, which I think you're all fairly familiar with because we all do these webinars all the time, but it's just to confirm that we are in agreement that we won't discuss anything relating to prices or anything which is considered uncompetitive or anti-competition. If anybody's got anything against that, would you like to raise your hand or say something? And if there is no objection, we will continue. Pause with silence, which is good. So just to introduce the people who are here today, I got the job of chairing this meeting because I chair the technical committee of GCP, and Helka in the secretariat, who is the director of programs and corporate partnerships, has been doing a great job steering us through the revision of the code and now into the equivalence mechanism revision. And we're working with Amy Russillo, who is an independent consultant with a lot of experience in a number of different commodity value chains and has been a tremendous help to us in getting the code revision sorted out and also the equivalence that we did last time round. So we're going to look at the background, the revision of the equivalence mechanism, have time for questions and hopefully answers, and then look at the next steps. So going on from there.
Thank you, John. And before we dive into the details, I wanted to give a bit of background of where this work sits within the Global Coffee Platform and why we're doing this work. So the equivalence mechanism is one of the tools that GCP has developed to promote the uptake of sustainable practices and the demand for that kind of coffee. So it works in combination with the Coffee Sustainability Reference Code that, as John mentioned, we have recently revised. And it works in combination with the GCP collective reporting, the snapshot. And these tools work together to promote this uptake. So, for example, the Coffee Sustainability Reference Code is a reference, a common language for baseline sustainability. And the idea or the ambition is that countries then use this common reference to develop their own sustainability plans, their strategies, their coffee sustainability curricula, and therefore then their extension programs that reach farmers. We also try to promote this as a tool for the value chain, the traders, the roasters, all the other actors, to build their own interventions in sustainability. If we all have the same basis, then the innovations and the additional work can be much more efficient. So we have this code that then through the equivalence mechanism, it's used in the snapshot. So roasters and retailers can voluntarily declare over the total of green coffee that they buy, how much is under these schemes that have been recognized as equivalent to the code. And the idea is that year over year, we have had so far 2 years covering 2 editions covering in 3 years, that we can see the progress of the different roasters and retailers towards a larger uptake of sustainable practices. And we know that we want to do this to go towards sustainable sourcing, acknowledging that sustainable production is one part of sustainable sourcing. It's not the only part, but it's an important part. And we know that there are conversations in the sector to have a more clear definition about what sustainable sourcing. But for the moment and for this webinar, we focus on these sustainable practices at farm level. And while we do this, we hope that if we all as a sector are more aligned in terms of how we refer to baseline sustainability, we can be more efficient and more effective to reach the scale that we want to promote farmer prosperity in particular, which is one of the pillars of GCP and of course the SDGs. But what is then this equivalence mechanism? And it's basically a framework, it's some lenses that we use to assess different schemes. These schemes can be public, it can be from the governments, it can be voluntary sustainability standards, or it can be private-led schemes from roasters, from traders, or from other kind of organizations. And we have a look at these different schemes with the same framework, the same lenses, to see if we consider them equivalent to the code, to what is in the code in practices, but also to see how they are implemented. So it has two angles that we're going to have a closer look today in the webinar. And before we dive into the details, we thought it would be useful to share just a bit of the evolution that this work has had. So the first version of the equivalence mechanism was released in December 2016, and it was the reflection of the schemes that were basically very at the forefront of sustainability at that point in time, which is still the case today, but at that point in time were basically it was seen as the response to sustainability, the certification schemes or the voluntary sustainability schemes. And thanks to their work, but also to the uptake of sustainability in the private sector, there are now many other schemes. So we wanted to develop an equivalence mechanism that can also embrace these other innovative approaches to sustainability and the work that others are doing. And the result of that was the equivalence mechanism 1.2 that was released last year. These are the schemes that have been recognized under this version of the equivalence mechanism. And also because we know that they are considered equivalent as those that have been approved or recognized under the 1.1, but we know that there are differences. We classify them differently. So we have classified them all, and we have made the differentiation whether they have a third-party assurance or a second-party assurance. So what we're going to be looking into the revision in this 2.0 revision is basically the elements that we felt during the present work that could be strengthened. How we can revise the equivalence mechanism so that it better reflects or embraces the diversity of schemes that we have now in the coffee landscape. And with that, John, I hand over to you so you can share with us information about the process.
The Secretariat has the responsibility for the revision of the equivalence mechanism, and it's done in connection and in collaboration with the technical committee. The technical committee of the Global Coffee Platform was inherited from the 4C Association, which was the technical committee was in place before the Global Coffee Platform came into being, and had the responsibility for the code revision. And the technical committee was largely made up of producers and of the sustainability codes. And because of the changing nature of the global platform, including many roasters and even retailers, other actors in the supply chain, the board of GCP thought it would be useful to include an advisory task force for the purposes of the code revision and also for the equivalence mechanism. So we've been working with the task force and the technical committee, not only on the code revision, but now also on the revision of the equivalence mechanism in collaboration with the Secretariat. When the work is completed, when it's been fully drafted and the draft agreed, it will be handed by the technical committee to the board of GCP, who will then make the decision. And after that, it will be implemented, which we anticipate to be in the second half of 2022. So that explains the background to the governance of this process, I hope. Please do feel free to ask any questions about that at the end if you have any. So moving on to the next slide. This is the time frame that we have for the revision of the equivalence mechanism. We're starting now, and we're doing a certain amount of stakeholder outreach. We're particularly reaching out to stakeholders who might have interest in equivalence, who may have schemes, to stakeholders who may be involved in national sustainability curricula, private schemes, or other sustainability arrangements. And so we're developing the first draft in January, February. We'll do the consultation and outreach between probably January and April, have a final draft, we hope, by May, and looking for board approval in July for implementation in the second half of 2022. So I'm going to pass back to Amy, who is going to take us on through some of the technical detail of the revision of the equivalence mechanism. Amy.
Thanks, John. And so I will be diving a little bit into the technical aspects of this, but still at a fairly high level. There are more details on the project, as well as the details of this technical aspects on the GCP project website. And I think that Helke is going to drop that link into the chat. It'll also be in with the resources and with the slide deck. So Helke already gave an overview of this kind of evolution from the equivalency mechanism 1.1 to where we are now. So we had this interim step of a 1.2, and thank you for many of those that are on the call that were very instrumental in testing this and kind of seeing how can we embrace other types of innovative approaches to sustainability. The basis of the 1.2, so what do we mean? This all sounds great, but what does this mean? The basis was the baseline coffee code, the existing one, because at the time we did not have the new coffee sustainability reference code yet. And then a set of operational criteria that was expanded from the 1.1. So we had those around data assurance and claims. And again, the details can be found on the project website. So that's what we used as for the equivalency mechanism 1.2, those two pieces, the content, kind of the sustainability criteria, as well as then the implementation, operational or system criteria. Next slide. So on that, where we're focusing now for the equivalency the 2.0, the sustainability criteria are set in the new reference code. So there we will need to work on ensure we have good guidance. But the areas that we think that need the most attention because of the evolution, the changing landscape, the different approaches is on the operational implementation side of the systems and the different sustainability initiatives. We'll be looking specifically at scheme governance and standard setting, which was not covered in the 1.2. We have assurance and claims, which was, but we'll be looking at how do we embrace different approaches and how do we ensure that those are credible in the marketplace and with claims. Claims about the recognition and also data. We all know data has become more and more important, both for evidence in what we're doing, but as well as accountability to our stakeholders. So these are the four main areas that we'll be looking at in the revision in the 2.0 of the equivalency mechanism. However, we will still be looking at the other aspects of it. So next slide, please. So it is important that we refine the tools. And again, hats off to all those who helped us in the 1.2. They really helped in identifying where are the issues, where are the challenges, what is not clear. So we will need to be doing that for all of both the sustainability criteria. So for the new reference code, we have to make sure that we have good, clear guidance. So we have a level playing field. We also need to make sure that we can test and refine these tools with the guidance of the sustainability schemes themselves. We don't want to do this kind of going into a back room and just trying to say, what do we think is important? We want to do that together with the different schemes. We also need to have then the equivalency on the operational criteria. We'll be working with guidance also with the different schemes. And we'll be talking about how that process will unfold in a minute. It's also going to be really important that we have a connection with the national sustainability criteria. It needs to make sure that we have the guidance so they can have the interoperability with existing national sustainability curricula. And then the implementation, of course, is going to be important from the business model of this. How can we do this in a credible but efficient way? What tools can we use that already exist? We have been looking at exploring with, for example, the UN, the United Nations International Trade Center, using the backbone of their standards map. So this is the things that we'll be looking at to make sure that the implementation of this is both efficient and effective and credible. because that's going to be important for all the users of the equivalency mechanism, from the schemes to all the way into supply chain actors that are perhaps looking at this or with national curriculum. Next slide. So what's going to be, what we want to, part of this webinar is also to introduce you to the topic, but also to help understand the opportunities to participate in this. There is going to be consultation in March through April, and then we also have the beta testing that will be happening. We found with the 1.2, the beta testing was very effective. It was quite helpful to have the different schemes participating in that actively, providing feedback, pushing back, asking questions, telling us what didn't make sense, what could be improved. That's very important for the process. So we'll have both of these opportunities. So whether you are actually have a scheme or initiative, or whether you're just a general stakeholder, there are plenty of opportunities to participate in this. So let me talk a little bit about the beta testing specifically, because this is what we found was quite effective in going from the 1.2. And this is really having the schemes themselves going through the process to help us test the tool. This helps us understand where guidance is needed. If a scheme cannot understand, or if they provide evidence that does not meet, for example, what we think is the requirement, then we realize that we need to have better guidance to make sure there's consistency. Also then for the operational criteria, we really also have to understand the feasibility of operational criteria. Where's our ambition? And where are we now? And where can we drive continuous improvement? And we see this as happened during the 1.2 as we went through the beta testing. This allowed self-assessments that allowed the schemes themselves to get insights and see opportunities to improve their own systems. Help them identify where can we raise the boat here. So we will be doing this with a mix of recognized schemes and hopefully new schemes. We like to test the tool, so it is a challenge to bring on new schemes and to see how they can fit into this. It will not be an assessment of equivalency. It will be actually testing the tool. We'll be doing this in a two-step wise. We already have the reference code. It's been approved in October. So we'll be focusing on that first. And then as the operational criteria are refined and developed, as you saw, there was a public consultation period in March and April. As that's refined and developed through the advisory task force and the technical committee, then we will be doing the beta testing then during that period. So it'll be kind of a two-phase approach there. So I think I will be handing it back to Helga with this one, and hopefully we'll have lots of good questions that come up during the Q&A.
Yes, so now we really invite you, from the list of participants that we have here, we know that there are people who are very familiar with the process, and we know that there are people who have asked about the process, or who has interest about the process. So this is really your opportunity to ask any questions you may have about the process. We have a couple of questions that come quite often, so we wanted to put them here. So maybe these are already some questions that you have had, and if not, then we really invite you to put questions on the chat or raise your hand, and we can have a conversation. The first one is, when will be the revised equivalence mechanism released or published? And when will be put into use, the implementation? As John mentioned, the idea that we have is that we want to have a revised version by summer 2022. When it will be put into use, the implementation, with the ideas that is thereafter, so that in Q3 we start then the process of reassessing all the schemes. But it really depends also on the options that we are exploring at the moment for implementation. As Amy mentioned, we are trying to do this in a way that is efficient and credible. We have seen that there's a lot of interest in the tool and in this assessment, and in the Secretariat, since we are quite a small organization, we don't have the resources to basically, or would be challenging to then reassess all the schemes internally in-house in GCP. So we're trying to see how we can do that in a way that is efficient, and that works for everyone. Another question that we get quite often is if the schemes that are now, that went through the EM 1.2, or actually those who are going at the moment through the assessment. We have various schemes that are actually at the moment going through that process, if they would need to go through the equivalence mechanism when it has been revised, the version then EM 2.0. And the answer is yes, and it's not only those that have been recognized under EM 1.2, those that may be recognized if the outcome of the process is positive, but also all the others, those that were recognized under EM 1.1, we're going to, since the criteria, the coffee sustainability reference code is new, and the set of operational criteria is going to be also revised, we're going to have a reassessment of all the schemes. Another question that we have is what will be the transition period for schemes that are already recognized? And this is a topic that we will actually have a look in the consultation. We know that in the Coffee Sustainability Reference Code, we have introduced new principles, new practices, and we're going to be exploring also what's a reasonable time for all the schemes to include this in their own programs. And we are going to, it's likely that we're going to have new criteria as part of the revised operational set of criteria. So we also are going to be exploring what is reasonable for the schemes to update or to change their programs. We also know that there are some schemes, for example, those that are part of the ICO community, that they face also other procedures for changes in the standards, that may be not the case for those that are developed by the private sector. So we also want to be mindful that not everyone can overnight then change their systems and their approaches and have something, as we mentioned in the beginning, the idea is that this equivalence mechanism can really embrace all the different schemes that are now active in terms of sustainability in the coffee sector. Something that sometimes also is asked is about the composition of the technical committee and the advisory task force. And I just would like to mention that with these two groups, we have basically participants from all the segments in the value chain. So we have producers, we have also traders, we have certification schemes, and we have roasters and retailers. We have also NGOs. So I think it's quite a nice group that give us the perspectives from all the different parts of the value chain, and that's really useful. When we develop the proposals, then they're being looked at from different angles. But of course, this is going to be complemented with the consultation and this beta testing that is going to give us a closer insight on how then this is going to be put in practice and what is feasible and what makes sense. So I'll pause there. I will see if we have any other questions or comments.
We have several comments and questions or more questions in the chat. I've been trying to kind of moderate them a little bit, but some of them can answer, and I think others will just want to make sure we answer within the forum, so in case people miss the chat. The first one was from Ulrika asking about the use of it and the assessments of the GCP. Will they be publicly available, or are they already? Really getting to this question of transparency and accountability. We've had discussions on this in the advisory task force as well, as how much is public, how much is through the process. But Helga, perhaps you can from GCP answer this question.
So what we make public is that if the outcome of the process has been successful or not, if they're recognized as equivalent or not. So, for example, if there's a scheme that goes through the process and then in the process realizes this is not for me, or I don't see the sense in making particular changes, then we don't make any communication about it. I understand also, Ulrika, I think it's a bit where you're trying to point us as the importance of transparency. But what we make, basically, what we see is if the schemes are considered equivalent to a baseline. So the publication of, it will have, and that's a topic that we clearly are going to explore in the consultation, is what kind of information is important to have transparent. because the outcome of the assessment is going to tell you, yes, they meet the standard criteria, yes, they meet the operational criteria. So I think what is more interesting, perhaps, and a topic to follow up is what are the key, what is nice to have, what is not the, it's like a certification scheme when you have a cooperative that received their audit result. Those are generally not public unless they want to share with their suppliers or their buyers. You're muted, Amy.
Michelle has her hand up, but there's a couple other questions that were in the queue first. So Michelle, we'll get to you. One is an easy one. Richard wanted to know about when the recording would be available. I said you usually have a pretty quick turnaround, but realized some of your colleagues might not have been able to attend. So Helga, when do you think maybe, I assume before the holidays, so.
We will try. We will try. So, but you will have it, and latest will be coming back from the holidays, but it will be made available.
Okay. Paula had asked from Neumann that for the operational criteria on the guidance will be built by the GCP based on the beta testing that will take place next year. My response had been, we have some guidance. We will be building upon that and improving it based on the beta testing. But I don't know, Helga, if you want to add anything to that. And then Olivia, and then we'll get to Michelle. So LDC had intended to apply for the EM in Q1 2022 in the middle of the revision process. Will we have to wait and postpone our application until the new process is in place, or can we still apply based on the EM 1.2? So that was a very specific question about whether it's too late to go through the process for 1.2. I don't know, Helga, if you want to take that one offline with them directly or just.
I'm happy to follow up, Oliver, on exploring the options, but I think we made a call for this round, in particular looking into the GCP collective reporting that is also connected to that. No, so we revised our timelines also depend on when we think the schemes would have been going through the process, so we can include them in the next round of reporting. And that closes basically in end of January. So we will need to have the schemes gone through that process by then. But also in terms of, given the changes that we're facing now with the equivalence mechanism, this revision, I think that it makes more sense to wait a couple of months and start the process with the revised version.
Great. And you can always follow up directly with Helga on that kind of one-on-one. So Michelle, finally, thank you for your patience, and then we'll get to Ulrika. So Ulrika will be after that. So
thanks. Of course, we have to respect the order. No, my reaction was to the question of the transparency, on which I have another question. So yes, that we can think about the nice to have, but I think there are also a couple of must have when it comes to transparency, because if I understand correctly, so we try to align with some of the ISIL rules in order to make this serious and recognized scheme, of course, or mechanism, sorry. And there are some rules also to what has to be published, what is transparent. So I know we, for example, we have to transparently publish not only the list of certified, so for the others who don't know me, I'm from Rainforest Alliance, the list of certified certificate holders, but also, and I don't know exactly, but also some other information, high level. Of course, not the details of non-compliances, because those are very personal, but there is a little bit more details that have to be transparently published.
Great, it's great advice, and we are. I think it's good that Michelle brought up the point that we are looking for ISIL codes as kind of inspiration and using those as guidance and coordinating actually with them as well. And we've been having these discussions with the advisory task force and the technical committee. What are those minimums of transparency? What are the minimal expectations on stakeholders? And so you will be seeing that reflected in the versions that go out for then public consultation. But yeah, there's definitely some that need to be there, and their minimal expectations, but we're definitely having those debates right now and talking through those. So, one of the points that I had raised with the implementation was as well that potentially using the UN International Trade Center standards map. I don't know if people are familiar with that, so I'll say the whole name, which would actually have then more of the information in the public domain. It's a public good, the standards map, and so the information would be more in the public. So we would expect to see more of that information in the general public domain. All right, so Ulrike, and that probably is maybe even related to that because it was sparked by your initial question. So,
yeah, no, I just wanted to underline my question or like also what Michelle said, that I think, I mean, what I understood is that the goal of this revision and the revision of the equivalence mechanism is also that not only within GCP membership this is used, but it's taken up from the complete coffee sector. I think to achieve this goal, the transparency and accountability issues or aspects are really important. So what I somehow also was already looking for when you recognize the other schemes this year to be equivalent with the coffee baseline code was something like, okay, so how did this assessment, how did you do this assessment? And you know, some kind of actually just, I always thought, okay, there should be some kind of table where you have, okay, these are the criteria in the baseline coffee code, these are the criteria in this and this scheme, and you know, this is our reasoning why we say this is equivalent, so that you can have a look at that and also see, okay, you know, I can check also myself how I see that and judge that. I think that would be, from my point of view, very important so that this is taken up by the coffee sector as a whole and not only used within GCP.
Great. Ulrike's question is really important, and I think it's important to think about the difference of, one is the transparency of what we were starting to talk about just now, or we're talking more about the transparency of, for example, the policies or the data that a specific scheme has. And Ulrike is talking as well about the transparency of the results of the assessment. And they are two separate things, and they're both very critical. We had talked about having the transparency of the results of the assessment, and it is still open to do that for the 2.0. One of the challenges has been that we didn't have the transparency of the assessments of those that went through 1.0. So we did not have the transparency of the fair trades, the Rainforest Alliance, the Nespressos. And so to have a level playing field, we really felt it was key to not introduce that in just for those that were just coming on in the 1.2. But it is a very fair assessment, and it's a very important point that we are taking under, you know, we know that we need to address. Since there will be no grandfathering of any schemes under the 2.0, that means that if they were recognized under 1.0 or 1.1 or 1.2, they still have to go through the 2.0. There will be no grandfathering. That means that there is that opportunity to say transparency on results, but it would need to be a level playing field. And that's where we still have to work with the advisory task force and the technical committee about, again, the expectations as well as protecting, again, as well as confidentiality and aspects of that. We want this to drive improvement and not, this is not a kind of a beauty pageant and trying to say this one is better. We're trying to drive improvement. And so we really have to strike that balance there. I'm not sure if Helke from GCP, you want to chime in. I'm saying this as this is the hat of an external independent consultant working with this and working with many benchmarking initiatives. And we did think hard about that question. So Ulrike is very, very important.
I would just perhaps add that it would be great to have then this conversation again once we have the proposal for consultation and see what we put forward, how it resonates and how can it be improved. So really, Ulrike and also Michelle and everyone who's interested and on this topic on transparency in particular, really keen to have your views during the consultation.
And Miguel also brought in the point on this, and thank you, Miguel. Miguel's also been instrumental and hardworking and within the technical committee and has contributed enormously to that. It said, transparency on results are directly directly linked to what can be communicated, and that's something again that we will be looking at and potentially revising, refining the rules of this process. Great questions. This is when we want to be challenged and kind of push ourselves. We want to definitely, we need to push the envelope. At the same time, we need to hear about your concerns as well as your expectations from this. So. Any other? We had from Nadia a nice thumbs up, a comment, and thank you for this. And so thank you, Nadia. It's also good sometimes when you're in the middle of all the details and feeling a bit overwhelmed to have someone say, okay, we're on the right track. So thank you, Nadia, for that encouragement. Let me make sure we didn't miss any questions. If anybody has any questions, a great opportunity now. You've got the team here, and
it's very encouraging to have people joining this webinar, actually, and from so many different parts of the world. So thank you for taking the time. We have very lively discussions in the technical committee with the task force because we come at it from so many different angles. And having that wide representation makes a huge difference in terms of hopefully coming to conclusions with relation to transparency. I mean, there are so many aspects, aren't there? Traceability, transparency, accountability. Who is in a position to say what, particularly in the shadow of COP26, with everybody really concerned about some of the aspects of real sustainability. We want a coffee sector which can contribute to the planet and not detract from it, quite apart from keeping everybody awake to go to work.
Oh, good. Angela posted for those interested in becoming beta testers, what are the next steps? So that's Helga.
Yeah, this is a good segue into the slide on next steps. We have a couple of minutes more if there are more questions. So let me just share about next steps. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes, basically, so we have the beta testing, as Amy mentioned, is going to be in two parts, as the tool for the self-assessment against the coffee sustainability reference code is there because the code has been published. We can start that basically right now. So anyone who's interested in that beta testing, please let me know by the end of this year if they would like to be part of this process, and we can start in January. And then once we have the proposal for the consultation, then we will then share the tool for that part. And of course, the consultation is also another opportunity to get engaged. The exact dates are still to be confirmed. It will be a period of 30 days. And in the website that I shared on the chat, you're going to be having the information being updated. And we have we're going to be sharing that in the Espresso, and we're going to be following up for those who have expressed interest, so they know where we are in terms of the progress that we're making in the project.
So Angela, I hope that answered your question. Get in touch with Helga. Yeah, we have a variety of people. I guess a lot of the others might have been John's schemes themselves. So if anybody from any of the schemes would like to ask any questions, I mean, realize you can individually follow up as well, or even talk about your experience, feel free. We've just got a few minutes, I guess, left.
We said we would try and stick to 45 minutes. Would anybody like to raise any other questions? Because we try and stick to our time on our webinars, because we all go to too many webinars these days, and we try not to make them go past our time by moment. I think that it's probably to say thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Please do follow this along. Please do get involved. If you've got a scheme and you want to be beta tested, please do so. The people who, the schemes that went through the beta testing for 1.2 actually came back to us and said they found the process quite helpful. And it was certainly helpful to us in terms of trying to work out what is doable and what works. But as Ulrika said, what we're looking for here is something that doesn't just apply to a few people in a corner. This is hopefully something which will be useful for the entire coffee sector, because it does set out a platform for sustainability at a level which, with continuous improvement, we believe will make a significant difference to the coffee industry going forward. And it's a real importance, because we are caught between the real importance of the credibility of what we do, and at the same time the accessibility. There's always a bit of a tension. And what we need is your help to make sure that we can achieve a good tension between the two, so that the schemes that want to use the equivalence mechanism and what they're doing is they not only find it accessible, but actually that at the end of the day, the Sustainable Coffee Reference Code is seen to be a credible and valuable tool for the coffee industry to support the producers in producing sustainable coffee, and in assuring the consuming end of the industry that what they're doing is both credible and valuable all the way along the value chain. I don't know if Amy or Helge, you would like to add a final word?
No, thank you, everyone. This is the last webinar GCP is doing this year. So warm thank you to everyone, and we look forward to next year seeing you virtually again or physically. Hopefully have a good end of the year and a great start into 2022.